When people look at me, they see beauty. It's the first word that comes to their minds, beautiful. They say it like it's a compliment, but for me, it's always felt like a cage. I don't remember when I first heard it, but I do remember my mother smiling as she brushed my hair, saying, "You're going to be stunning, Olivia. Just look at those eyes, that skin." She said it like it was a prophecy, a gift bestowed upon me. And maybe it could have been, if it weren't for the fact that it became the only thing that mattered to her, and eventually, to everyone else. By the time I was 6, I was already wearing tiaras. Not the kind you get for pretending to be a princess in your backyard, but the kind they place on your head after parading you across a stage under harsh lights while a panel of judges picks apart your smile, your posture, even your voice. My mom, Heather, lived for those pageants. "This is about building confidence," she'd say, pinning another number to the back of my sparkly dress. "You'll thank me when you're older." What I didn't have the words to tell her then was that it wasn't confidence I was learning, it was performance. I was learning how to smile through discomfort, to hide the tears when I lost, to stand still as strangers commented on my weight or the way my teeth weren't perfect enough yet. As I got older, the pageants faded, replaced by a new stage, Instagram. "Post this," Mom would say, snapping photo after photo of me in carefully chosen outfits, my hair perfectly curled. "Make sure you use the hashtags I showed you." My dad, Mark, wasn't as hands-on, but he supported her obsession. "This is good for her," he'd say when she showed him my follower count. "She's building a brand." A brand. That's what I was to them. Not their daughter, but a product they could polish, market, and showcase. Being pretty wasn't enough, though. I had to be smart, charming, poised, the total package. I wasn't allowed to have bad days or make mistakes. "People are always watching," Mom would remind me. "You can't let them see you slip." I carried that pressure everywhere, to school, where my classmates whispered behind my back about how perfect I was, to family gatherings where relatives gushed over my achievements, and even to the privacy of my own room, where the mirror became my worst enemy. It was in middle school that I first felt the weight of it all. I remember being late for a family dinner because I'd been crying in my room, overwhelmed by a bad grade on a math test. When I finally joined my parents, my mom looked at my red eyes and frowned. "You should have fixed your face," she said, handing me a tissue. "You don't want people to see you like this." That's when I realized, my emotions weren't mine. They were an inconvenience, something to hide because they didn't fit the image they'd created. High school was worse. I became that girl, the one everyone knew for being beautiful, successful, unattainable. Teachers expected me to excel in every class, classmates assumed my life was perfect, and boys saw me as some kind of trophy to win. At home, the pressure was even greater. Mom pushed me to join student council because it looked good, while Dad suggested I focus on scholarships for schools they'd chosen for me. "What about art school?" I asked once, hesitantly. Mom's laugh was sharp. "Art's a hobby, Olivia, not a career. You're too smart to waste your potential on that." It was easier to give in than to fight. My parents knew how to control me. They never yelled or punished outright, instead, they used guilt and shame. "After everything we've done for you," Mom would say if I ever pushed back. "Do you think other kids get these opportunities? We're just trying to help you succeed." Their words were like a leash, pulling me back whenever I tried to stray. It wasn't until my junior year that I found a lifeline. Her name was Lila, and she was the complete opposite of me. She didn't care about appearances or what people thought of her. "Why do you let them push you around?" she asked one afternoon as we sat in her room, a mess of books and paintings scattered around us. "It's not that simple," I said, staring at the floor. She didn't press me, but her words stuck. Despite Lila's friendship, I continued playing the role my parents expected. I went to every event they planned, smiled for every photo, and followed every rule. But inside, I felt like I was cracking. I started staying up late, sketching in a hidden notebook I kept under my bed. It was the only thing that felt real to me, the only thing that wasn't for anyone else's approval. The turning point came during my senior year. My parents had arranged for me to speak at a charity gala, presenting a polished speech about the importance of giving back. I didn't show up. Instead, I went to Lila's art exhibit, watching as she stood proudly beside her work. For the first time, I felt like I was in a space where I didn't have to perform. When I got home, my parents were furious. Mom's voice was sharp as she said, "Do you know how embarrassing this was for us?" For once, I didn't apologize. Skipping the gala felt liberating in the moment, but the fallout was immediate. My parents didn't yell, but their disappointment was palpable. "We've always trusted you to represent this family," my dad said that night, his voice calm but cutting. "What happened?" "I didn't want to go," I replied, surprising even myself with my honesty. Mom's eyes narrowed. "It's not about what you want, Olivia. It's about responsibility. Do you think we enjoy planning all these events? We do it for you. For me." That phrase echoed in my mind, making me feel both guilty and furious. I called Lila the next day, still reeling from the confrontation. "Good for you," she said when I told her about skipping the gala. "They need to understand you're not a doll they can pose however they want." "I don't think they'll ever understand," I said, lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. "Then you have to make them," Lila replied. "You deserve to be happy, Liv. Whatever that looks like for you." Her words stayed with me, a spark of hope in an otherwise suffocating world. Over the next few weeks, I poured myself into my art. Late at night, after my parents had gone to bed, I'd sit at my desk with a sketchpad, letting my emotions spill out onto the paper. My drawings weren't perfect, but they felt raw and honest in a way I couldn't be anywhere else. One night, Lila came over and saw my sketches for the first time. "These are incredible," she said, flipping through the pages. "You should show people." I shook my head. "My parents would kill me. They think art's a waste of time." "Then don't tell them," she said with a mischievous grin. "Show the world anyway." I took Lila's advice to heart, submitting one of my pieces to a local art competition under a pseudonym. When I found out I'd won third place, I felt a rush of pride unlike anything I'd ever experienced. But when I told my parents, the reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. "Why didn't you tell us about this?" Mom asked, her tone sharp. "Because I knew you wouldn't approve," I said, trying to stay calm. "You're wasting your time," Dad said. "You have so much potential, Olivia. Focus on what matters." Their dismissal stung, but it also fueled my determination. As I started carving out small spaces of freedom, the gap between me and my parents grew. I stopped participating in their carefully curated events and spent more time with Lila or at the art studio she introduced me to. It felt like I was living a double life, one as the perfect daughter they expected and another as the person I wanted to be. But balancing the two was exhausting. The tension came to a head one evening when my parents found one of my sketchbooks hidden under my bed. "Is this why you've been so distracted lately?" Mom asked, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "It's not a distraction," I said, my voice shaking. "It's important to me." Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "You can't build a future on this, Olivia. You need to focus on things that matter, college, scholarships, a real career. What if this is what matters to me?" I shot back, surprising both of us. The silence that followed was deafening. After that argument, I started spending more nights at Lila's house. Her parents were warm and welcoming, their home filled with the kind of chaos and laughter that felt foreign to me. "You can stay here as long as you need," Lila's mom said one evening, placing a plate of cookies in front of us. It was a kindness I didn't know how to accept, but it gave me the strength to keep fighting for myself. With Lila's encouragement, I started seeing a therapist. At first, I felt awkward and defensive, unsure of what to say. "My parents aren't bad people," I said during our first session. "They just don't understand me." My therapist, Dr. Morgan, nodded. "It's okay to acknowledge their good intentions while also recognizing the harm their actions have caused. You're allowed to feel both." Her words felt like permission to finally be honest with myself. As I grew more confident, I started setting small boundaries. I refused to attend events that didn't align with my interests and began spending my weekends at the art studio instead of at home. My parents didn't take it well. "You're being selfish," Mom said during one argument. "Do you know how much we've sacrificed for you?" But I was learning not to let their guilt trips control me. One night, as I walked home from the art studio, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. The world around me felt alive, the stars overhead shining brightly, the sound of distant laughter carrying on the breeze. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to be the person my parents wanted me to be. I could create my own path, no matter how messy or uncertain it might be. That thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. By the time senior year wrapped up, my life had become a carefully constructed illusion. At home, I still played the part of the dutiful daughter, doing just enough to keep my parents off my back. But outside the house, I was someone else entirely, a budding artist with a growing sense of independence. The weight of living this double life was exhausting. Every smile I forced at dinner, every "yes, Mom," when I wanted to scream, chipped away at me. The only time I felt free was at the art studio, where I could lose myself in charcoal and paint, my emotions spilling onto the canvas in ways I couldn't express with words. One evening, during a rare family dinner, my dad cleared his throat and said, "We've been talking, and we think Stanford is the best option for you. It's prestigious, and the connections you'll make there are invaluable." Stanford. I'd applied only because they'd insisted, not because I actually wanted to go. "What about the art school in New York?" I asked cautiously. My mom's fork clattered against her plate. "We've been over this, Olivia. Art isn't a career, it's a hobby. You're too smart to waste your potential." I stared at them, the frustration boiling beneath my skin. "It's not wasting my potential if it's what I want to do." Their silence was louder than any argument. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later, when I found out I'd been accepted to the New York Art School. I ran home, clutching the acceptance letter like a lifeline. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance to escape, to build a life that was mine. But when I showed my parents the letter, their reactions crushed me. "This isn't happening," Mom said flatly, tearing the letter from my hands. "We're not paying for you to chase some silly dream." "I'll pay for it myself," I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. Dad crossed his arms. "And how do you plan to do that? You can't even afford rent in New York, let alone tuition." Their dismissal hit harder than any insult. I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I ended up at Lila's house, tears streaming down my face as I recounted the argument. "I can't do this anymore," I sobbed. "I feel like I'm suffocating." Lila hugged me tightly. "You're not crazy, Liv. They're the ones holding you back. You don't have to live like this." But how could I leave? I didn't have the money, the connections, or the courage. For the first time, I felt truly trapped. A few days later, I had a therapy session with Dr. Morgan. I told her everything: the fight with my parents, the acceptance letter, the overwhelming fear of failing if I left. "Fear is normal," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "But think about what's on the other side of it. What would your life look like if you didn't let fear stop you?" Her question stayed with me. That night, I sat down and wrote a list of what I wanted my life to look like: independence, freedom, art, happiness. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Determined to save for New York, I took a part-time job at a local coffee shop, telling my parents it was just for spending money. The job was humbling but liberating. For the first time, I was earning my own money, however small. It felt like a step toward freedom. Lila came in often, leaving generous tips and encouraging me to keep going. "Every dollar gets you closer to your dream," she said. The situation at home reached a boiling point when my parents discovered my New York plans weren't just a fantasy. "I'm not staying here," I told them one night after dinner. "I'm going to New York, with or without your help." Mom's face turned red with anger. "Do you know how ungrateful you sound? After everything we've done for you?" "You didn't do it for me," I snapped. "You did it for yourselves, for your perfect little image." "Well, I'm done being your puppet." The words were out before I could stop them, but I didn't regret them. The next morning, I packed my bags and left. My parents didn't try to stop me, they barely looked at me as I walked out the door. I moved in with Lila, who welcomed me with open arms. "You're doing the right thing," she said as we set up my makeshift bed in her living room. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A few weeks later, I received an email from my aunt, who lived in New York. She'd heard about the fallout with my parents and offered to let me stay with her while I attended art school. "I've always admired your spirit," she wrote. "You deserve a chance to follow your dreams." Her kindness brought me to tears. For the first time, New York felt like a real possibility. With my aunt's support, I bought a bus ticket to New York. Lila hugged me tightly before I left, tears in her eyes. "You're going to be amazing, Liv. I know it." As the bus pulled out of the station, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it felt like it was mine to shape. When the bus pulled into the station, the city loomed large and overwhelming. The streets were alive with noise, honking cabs, chattering pedestrians, the occasional street musician filling the air with melody. My aunt, Marcy, stood waiting at the platform, waving excitedly. She was a whirlwind of energy, hugging me tightly and grabbing my bag in one motion. "You're going to love it here," she said as we climbed into her car. "It's crazy, but in the best way." Her enthusiasm was contagious. As we drove through the city, I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Marcy's apartment was small but cozy, filled with vibrant artwork and bookshelves stacked to the ceiling. She gave me the tiny guest room, complete with a squeaky bed and a view of the fire escape. "It's not much," she said, "but it's home." For the first time in months, I felt safe. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything I'd left behind, my parents, their expectations, the life I'd outgrown. It was bittersweet, but mostly, I felt free. The first day at art school was both thrilling and terrifying. I walked through the halls, surrounded by students who seemed effortlessly cool and confident. In my first class, the instructor, Professor Layton, handed out blank canvases and said, "Show me who you are." I stared at the canvas, my mind racing. Who was I? For so long, I'd been what my parents wanted me to be. Now, I had to figure it out for myself. As the weeks passed, I started to find my footing. I befriended a group of students who shared my love for art and my struggle to define themselves. Maya, a painter with a flair for the dramatic, quickly became my closest friend. "Your work has soul," she said one afternoon as we painted side by side. "You're going to make waves here." Her encouragement gave me the confidence to keep pushing myself. One evening, as I worked on a project in the apartment, my phone buzzed with a call from my mom. I hesitated, my heart racing as I debated whether to answer. "Hello," I said finally. Her voice was cold. "We just wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," I replied. "School is great." There was a long pause before she said, "You know this isn't sustainable, Olivia. You can't do this forever." "I can," I said firmly. "And I will." When the call ended, I felt shaken but proud. Professor Layton took an interest in my work, often pulling me aside to offer feedback. "Your pieces have raw emotion," he said one afternoon. But you're holding back. What are you afraid of? His question hit harder than I expected. What was I afraid of? Failure? Rejection? My parents' disapproval? That night, I painted for hours, pouring all my fears and frustrations onto the canvas. The result was messy and chaotic, but it felt like me. At the end of the semester, the school held an exhibition to showcase student work. Maya encouraged me to submit a piece, but I hesitated. What if it's not good enough? I asked. She rolled her eyes. It's already good enough. You just need to believe it. With her encouragement, I submitted the painting I'd created after Professor Layton's advice. The night of the exhibition, the gallery buzzed with energy. Students, faculty, and visitors wandered through, admiring the work. When I saw my painting on the wall, framed and lit under soft lights, I felt a swell of pride. A woman stopped in front of it, studying it for a long moment before turning to me. "This is powerful," she said. "What inspired it?" I hesitated, then said, "Breaking free." Marcy came to the exhibition, beaming as she walked through the gallery. "You found your voice," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Her words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I'd been searching for approval, and here it was, from someone who truly saw me. That night, as I walked home, I reflected on how far I'd come. I wasn't the same girl who hid behind a mask of perfection, afraid to speak her truth. For the first time, I felt like I was living for myself, and it was only the beginning. Something shifted after the exhibition. Seeing my work displayed in the gallery wasn't just validation, it was a reminder that I could build a life on my own terms. I threw myself into my art, waking up every morning with a sense of purpose. The small victories, completing a difficult piece, receiving feedback from my professors, even just finding my rhythm, helped me rebuild the confidence my parents had chipped away. Maya noticed the change. "You're glowing," she teased one afternoon in the studio. "Keep this up, and they'll name a wing of this school after you." We laughed, but deep down, I knew I was finally starting to believe in myself. One day, I came home to find a letter from my mom waiting in the mailbox. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and formal, almost businesslike. "Olivia, we've been thinking about everything and want to talk. Let us know when you're free. Love, Mom." I wasn't sure how to feel. Was this an olive branch or just another attempt to control me? Either way, I wasn't ready to respond. Professor Layton approached me with an exciting opportunity, a chance to create a commissioned piece for a local nonprofit's fundraiser. "They're looking for something powerful," he said. "And your work speaks to that." The thought of someone paying for my art felt surreal, but I accepted the challenge. The project became my focus for weeks, pushing me to explore themes of identity, freedom, and self-expression. Lila came to visit during spring break, her suitcase filled with snacks and photos from home. "You're thriving," she said as we sat in my tiny room, catching up. "It's like New York was made for you." "I still have a long way to go," I admitted. "But it feels good to be doing something for myself." She grinned. "Told you so." Having her there reminded me of the support that had carried me through my hardest moments. The commission piece brought up a lot of emotions, forcing me to confront my past in ways I hadn't before. One night, as I sketched, I found myself thinking about the expectations my parents had placed on me, the years I'd spent trying to meet their impossible standards. Instead of pushing the thoughts away, I let them fuel my work. By the time the piece was finished, it felt like I'd poured my soul onto the canvas. A few days after finishing the commission, I received a call from my dad. "I saw your exhibition online," he said. "Your aunt sent me a link." My heart raced. "And?" "It was impressive," he admitted. "I didn't know you had that in you." His words were hesitant, but they felt genuine. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged my talent. "I'm proud of you, Olivia," he added before hanging up. I sat in silence for a long time, processing what felt like a small but meaningful step toward understanding. The fundraiser was a success, and my commission piece sold for more than I'd ever imagined. The buyer, a kind woman named Eleanor, approached me afterward. "Your work resonates," she said. "It's raw and honest. You have a gift." Her praise felt like a milestone, a reminder that I was capable of building a future I could be proud of. After weeks of reflection, I decided to respond to my mom's letter. I wrote carefully, choosing my words with intention. "Mom, thank you for reaching out. I'm open to talking, but I need you to understand that my life is my own now. I won't compromise who I am to fit anyone else's expectations. Love, Olivia." Sending the letter felt like closure, whether or not she accepted my terms. By the end of the year, my life looked completely different. I'd secured a part-time job at a gallery, found a tiny apartment of my own, and continued to grow as an artist. It wasn't perfect, I still struggled with doubts and insecurities, but it was mine. I reflected on how far I'd come, from the girl who hid her sketchbook under her bed to someone who wasn't afraid to take up space in the world. One evening, as I walked home from the gallery, I passed a storefront window and caught my reflection. For the first time, I didn't see a mask or a performance. I saw myself, strong, determined, and free. Life wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity, about finding joy in the imperfections and learning to embrace who I was. As I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, I smiled. I didn't need anyone else's approval. I was finally living for me.